Welcome to the Virginia Civics and Economics Lecture Series. At the end of each slide, there will be a 5-second delay. Use this time to complete your notes. When you are done, push play and move on to the next slide. This presentation will begin in 5 seconds. Welcome to Virginia Civics and Economics Lecture 3.6 on becoming involved in the political process, and your vote counts. Well, doesn't it? I mean, don't vote. Don't complain. I'm John Q. Voter, and I approve this message. We hear that all the time. But we don't often hear this. If voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it. That's Mark Twain, famous American writer. Well, bad officials are elected by good citizens who do not vote, right? I don't know. Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Well, you know what? I'm going to say this in response to that. Young people need to vote. They need to get out there. Every vote counts. Educate yourself too. Don't just vote. Know what you're voting for and stand by that. Or, American youth attributes much more importance to arriving at driver's license age than at voting age. So, your vote counts, but how? Why should you become involved in the political process in the first place? And what will you actually get out of being an active participant? Well, we're going to address those questions today, and with that said, let's go to the next slide. You already learned that voting is a civic responsibility. There is no law in the United States requiring you to vote in an election. So we have to ask ourselves, who votes and why do they vote? There are certain factors that predict who will vote, and we know these factors from a 2006 Pew Research poll. I'm not going to go into the numbers in detail, but I will summarize why people vote. The first is education. The more educated people are, the more likely that they will vote in an election. Age is also a factor in determining if you will vote in an election. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote in an election. And income is a factor in determining who will vote in an election. The more money you make, the more likely you will vote in an election. There are other factors that include gender, race, marriage status, and attendance at a religious service, but it is those three main factors, education, age, and income, that will determine whether or not you will vote in an election. But it's not even across all elections. For example, more people vote in presidential elections than in other federal, state, and local elections or primaries. Well, now we know who will vote, so let's figure out why people fail to vote. There are several reasons why citizens fail to vote. Citizens lack interest because they are bored with politics, do not believe voting will impact them, or are cynical of our political system. Got cynicism? Also, citizens fail to register to vote because they are too busy, do not care, or have no confidence in the government. Guess what? Nobody cares. If you feel that way, you're not going to vote. Finally, Virginia ID voting laws require voters to provide an acceptable photo identification, which may discourage voter turnout by 2%, but studies are not conclusive at this time. We do not know conclusively whether voter ID laws suppress people from voting. But as you can see in this cartoon, James, what the heck is a photo? The question becomes, do we really need photos when it comes to voting? Go to the next slide. Now that we know who votes and why, it's time to go to college. Not that college. I'm talking about the Electoral College, which is a system where we choose from a slate of electors from each state based on the popular vote in that state to vote for president. Say what? What did I just say? That's right. In this country, citizens do not have the right to vote directly for their president. Instead, we're going to vote for electors. And in Virginia, we vote for 13 electors, 13 people who are going to vote on behalf of us to decide who will be president of the United States. Here's how this system works. Most states have a winner-take-all system. That means that when we select these 13 people, all 13 people are going to vote for either one candidate or the other. That's not what happens in Nebraska and Maine. They have a representational system, but in Virginia, all 13 electors are going to vote for one presidential candidate. Well, who are these electors? The electors are selected by the party that wins the popular vote. So, if the Republicans or the Democrats win the popular vote for president in Virginia, then all 13 electors will be from one political party, and they'll all go down to the State House to cast their vote. Wait a minute, this gets better. Electors do not have to vote for the candidate chosen by the people unless they are pledged to vote for a particular candidate. In other words, a person might win the popular vote in Virginia, but an elector is not required to vote for that person. They could vote for the other candidate. In some states, that's illegal. You have to vote for the person who won the popular election, but in other states, the elector can vote for whoever they want. And then all of the electors in the country meet to vote for the president and vice president. And if no candidate receives 270 votes from the college, the president is chosen by the House of Representatives and the vice president is chosen by the Senate. In other words, if these electors cannot figure out who wins the majority of votes, the president and vice president are chosen by Congress. So we have the Electoral College versus the popular vote, and in this case, when we're voting for president, we use this system. Why in the world do we put ourselves through all of this? Well, there are two reasons for the Electoral College. First, the results of the Electoral College exaggerate the true margin of victory for the winning candidate when compared to the popular vote. Almost every American election has been a close election, and it doesn't look so good when it looks like we voted for president by a very slim margin. So we use this Electoral College to show that the president won by a larger majority. That gives the president more power to say, I won this election by a large majority, and I have the right now to take over the presidency and run this country. Also, the Electoral College acts as a check on the will of the majority. This has almost never happened. But in theory, the Electoral College could turn around and say, the people have voted for this president, but we don't think this is the right person. We're going to select our own person. How well does all of this work? Sometimes there's a problem. The popular vote does not determine who wins the presidency. And there are instances where a candidate won the popular vote but did not win the presidency. This has happened in 1876, 1888, 2000, and most recently in 2016. And let me tell you, when this happens, this is a hot mess. People get very upset when we have a popular vote that is overridden by the vote of the Electoral College. There are multiple sides to why we do this. Some people say, well, it's fair because a lot of people live on the East and West Coast and in cities, and we need to protect the rights of those voters in rural areas. Other people say it's unfair. It gives more power to certain parts of the country over others. This is a hot button issue, and we're going to see over the next several years whether or not the United States of America will keep the Electoral College system. Go to the next slide. Just in case you haven't had enough of the Electoral College, let's focus on that whole winner-takes-all system thing. The winner-take-all system leads to the targeting of densely populated states for campaigning, but candidates must pay attention to less populated states whose electoral votes may make the difference in tight elections. Hey, remember when I told you that Virginia had 13 electoral votes? Here's how we got that number. The number of electors in each state is based on the size of the state's congressional representation, which is based on state population. So we have 8 million people in Virginia. We get 13 congresspeople or 13 electoral votes. Here's what the United States looks like, not geographically, but based on which states have the most population and get the most electoral votes versus which states do not. So in California, Texas, and Florida, they get all of the attention. In Montana and Rhode Island, not so much. This might be great for the states, but maybe it's not so good for individual citizens. The votes of citizens in states with smaller populations carry more weight than the votes of citizens in more populated states. So while Montana only has a couple of electoral votes, those people in Montana, they have a lot of weight, their individual vote, over who's going to win that electoral vote. In a place like California, it's diluted. There's so many voters that that one vote, you have more people voting for that one electoral vote. So in California, you actually have less power to vote for the presidency than somebody in Montana. What does all of this do when it comes to American politics? The requirement for a majority vote to win in the Electoral College, that's that 270 votes, favors a two-party system. In other words, all those electoral votes up there and all that targeting favors a two-party system. In fact, no third-party candidate has ever won the presidency. Let's talk about Teddy Roosevelt again. The closest a third party candidate got to winning an election was Theodore Roosevelt with 88 electoral votes. So even Teddy didn't get close to the 270 votes that are needed for a candidate to win an election. The Electoral College almost requires us to have a two-party system and nearly guarantees that one of the two major parties, their candidate, will be President of the United States of America. Go to the next slide. Despite all the wackiness with the Electoral College, we really have a fantastic representative democratic system in this country, and you should get involved. But again, you can't vote for a while. So how do you get involved as a student? Students can and should participate in the democratic process even if they cannot vote by doing the following things: participating in campaigns, attending a political rally, volunteering for a campaign, reading and watching the media to learn about the issues, talking about your views with parents, relatives, and other students, answering online opinion polls, and using social media to present your position and support to a wider audience. So, tell me more about how you're going to get involved and help change the world. Here's the thing: don't be sarcastic like Willy Wonka. Get involved. In fact, this is the 21st century. You have the access to the internet, YouTube, Twitter. You have more power these days to influence the world than any student did before your time. So get involved. Also, students can participate in classroom and online simulations, as well as run for and or vote in a school-wide election or the SCA election. Here's the thing: a lot of candidates got their start in school-wide elections, in student government. If you're interested in the political process, if you're interested in being a candidate, if you're interested in politics, why not start now? You help your school, you get your civic responsibility in, and you get to see what it's like to be in an election. That's it for this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in class.